Great Lakes and the channels that connect them make up one of the largest freshwater systems on Earth. The lakes are an indispensable source of drinking water for more than 48 million people in the U.S. and Canada.
Congressman Bill Huizenga is making a push to extend and boost federal funding for the Great Lakes. He, along with 3 other U.S. representatives and the Great Lakes Task Force, introduced bipartisan legislation Tuesday.
Water has guided the rise of civilizations for thousands of years, yet modern political disputes rarely center on it with this level of intensity. Across North America, the year 2026 brought a new tension that had little to do with land borders or shipping routes and everything to do with the most basic element required for life. When President Donald Trump raised the idea of expanding American access to the waters of the Great Lakes, Canadian leaders reacted with a seriousness that reflected the scale of what was at stake. The debate moved far beyond a simple policy conversation and quickly became a discussion about sovereignty, environmental protection, economic stability, and the future of cooperation between 2 nations that have spent generations building one of the closest partnerships in the world. Stretching across the international boundary between the United States and Canada lies the largest system of fresh surface water on the planet. The 5 Great Lakes contain close to 20% of all the fresh surface water found anywhere on Earth, a staggering share that explains why even the suggestion of changing how this resource is managed carries enormous consequences. Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario together form a freshwater network that has shaped North American industry, agriculture, and settlement patterns for centuries. These lakes also sit along the longest undefended border in the world, connecting communities that share deep economic ties, cultural exchange, and daily cross-border movement. For decades, the lakes symbolize cooperation rather than conflict. The waters supported shipping routes that carried iron ore, steel, grain, and manufactured goods across the continent, while also supplying drinking water for tens of millions of people living in cities and towns on both sides of the border. Recreational fishing, tourism, and outdoor culture developed around their shores, creating entire local economies that depended on stable water levels and healthy ecosystems. Yet environmental pressures unfolding far beyond the region gradually began to change the way these lakes were viewed in national conversations. Large parts of the United States have faced increasingly severe water stress, particularly across western and southern regions, where long periods of dry weather and rising temperatures have strained reservoirs and underground aquifers. States such as Arizona and California have already introduced restrictions that limit how much water farmers can use to grow crops, forcing difficult choices about agriculture, population growth, and long-term sustainability. Reservoirs that once served as dependable storage systems have shrunk dramatically in recent years, while groundwater reserves that took thousands of years to accumulate are being depleted far faster than nature can replenish them. Cities in these regions are engaged in constant debates about conservation policies designed to protect drinking water supplies. Lawn watering restrictions, limits on industrial use, and large-scale infrastructure investments have become part of everyday discussions in communities that once assumed water would remain plentiful. As rainfall patterns grow harder to predict and heat waves become more intense, attention naturally shifts toward the largest visible freshwater source on the continent. Against that backdrop, the Great Lakes begin to appear less like a distant natural wonder and more like a massive reservoir that could potentially ease pressure elsewhere. Supporters of President Donald Trump framed the proposal as a bold solution during a period of environmental and economic strain. Advocates argued that increased access to fresh water could strengthen American agriculture, support expanding metropolitan areas, and provide a safeguard against unpredictable climate patterns that continue to reshape water availability across the country. Those arguments quickly encountered a complex legal framework that governs the lakes and was specifically designed to prevent unilateral action by either nation. The system rests on agreements built over more than a century of diplomacy and environmental planning. At the center of that framework stands the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909, an agreement that created the International Joint Commission to oversee waters shared between the United States and Canada. The treaty established a guiding principle that cross-border water resources should be managed cooperatively and that neither country should undertake projects that cause significant harm to the other. Over time, that foundation expanded into more detailed protections as environmental awareness grew and governments recognized how delicate large water systems can become once heavy engineering projects begin altering their natural balance. One of the most significant modern protections came through the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin Water Resources Compact, an agreement among 8 American states that border the lakes. A parallel Canadian agreement reinforces the same restrictions north of the border, creating a coordinated system that places strict limits on transferring water outside the basin. Canada controls roughly half of the Great Lakes shoreline, with the province of Ontario overseeing vast stretches of the basin. Canadian water policy treats freshwater as a public trust that must be protected for future generations, a principle reinforced by environmental regulations, provincial governance, and the recognized rights of Indigenous nations whose histories with these waters reach back centuries before modern borders existed. When the proposal for expanded American access entered public debate, Canadian officials viewed it through this legal and environmental framework rather than as a routine diplomatic conversation. From Ottawa's perspective, the issue raised fundamental questions about national authority over natural resources. Prime Minister Mark Carney responded with language that remained measured but unmistakably firm, emphasizing that Canadian water policy would remain grounded in international agreements and environmental stewardship. Rather than escalating the rhetoric, the Canadian government concentrated on strengthening domestic systems that protect the lakes. Funding increased for shoreline infrastructure designed to improve water management. Environmental monitoring programs expanded to track ecosystem health more closely, and policy reforms tied industrial development more directly to strict water protection standards. These moves signaled that the legal structure surrounding the lakes was not an abstract concept, but an active system reinforced by ongoing investment and political commitment. That approach also carried a strategic message. By reinforcing existing protections, Ottawa demonstrated that external pressure would not reshape the agreements already governing the basin. The lakes are protected through a network of treaties, laws, and regional institutions developed through decades of cooperation between American states and Canadian provinces. Altering that system would require broad consensus across multiple governments, environmental reviews, and legal processes that extend far beyond the authority of any single administration. Beyond the legal framework lies an economic engine of enormous scale. The Great Lakes region supports an economy valued at approximately $890 billion, making it one of the most productive shared economic zones in the world. Major metropolitan areas including Chicago, Detroit, Toronto, and Hamilton depend on stable water conditions to sustain manufacturing, transportation, and municipal services. Ports along the lakes handle a steady flow of cargo that includes iron ore destined for steel production, grain shipments moving toward international markets, and a wide range of industrial materials that fuel North American supply chains. Changes in water levels can influence shipping capacity because cargo vessels require specific depths to operate efficiently. Even modest declines could force ships to reduce loads, raising transportation costs and slowing industrial output across multiple sectors. Fishing industries provide another layer of economic activity that depends heavily on stable ecological conditions. Both commercial fisheries and recreational anglers rely on healthy fish populations that respond quickly to shifts in water temperature, pollution levels, and shoreline habitats. Tourism adds billions of dollars to regional economies each year as visitors travel to lakeside towns for boating, fishing, and outdoor recreation. Any major change to water management rules would send shockwaves through this entire system. Shipping companies would reassess long-term investment strategies. Insurance firms would reevaluate risk models connected to infrastructure built along the shoreline. Construction projects tied to waterfront development could face new uncertainty if future water levels became unpredictable. Environmental organizations across both countries would almost certainly challenge large-scale diversion projects through the courts, citing the treaties and environmental assessments that currently protect the basin. Indigenous nations whose treaties recognize their stewardship roles in these waters would also demand a central voice in any decision that affects ecosystems tied deeply to cultural traditions and community livelihoods. Political tensions between Washington and Ottawa have occasionally surfaced over trade issues ranging from tariffs on manufactured goods to disagreements surrounding agricultural exports. These disputes, while serious, typically revolve around commodities and economic policy that can be renegotiated through diplomatic channels.